hope you're getting enough sleep, and I hope you have enough good company or enough good memory to last you a long time. Keep going, keep going, keep going on. Keep going on, song. We sing the keep going, keep going, keep going, keep going on. Keep going on, song. Let's bring some joy into the room, why not? We could try it, we could try it. Or some rage, keep going, keep going. And some grief and relief. I pray my rage is a fire that cleans my mind out and makes me ready to listen. I pray my pain is a river that flows to the ocean that connects my pain to yours. And I pray my happiness is like pollen that flies to you and pollinates your joy. Oh boy, is that possible? I don't know, we are making this up as we go. We have to make it up as we go. The keep going song, the keep going song. Oh, we're making it up as we go. Keep going, keep going on. Keep going on, song. And I pray that when we meet again, that the world has changed into the world that we are imagining now together. And I pray that the world has become the world that we're planting inside of ourselves for each other and for our ancestors and for our kids. Ooh, and we're gonna start. This is a rough beginning. That's all I've got is a rough beginning to offer you. We're gonna start by singing some songs in this tiny space together. We're just gonna sing some songs for you, and we hope that when you hear them, you will feel a little bit less alone, and we will feel a little bit less alone in the work and in the hurt, and we will be together tonight somehow, whenever this is, wherever this is. We will be together tonight. For the keep going on song. This is a keep going on. Keep going on song. This is a keep going on.
Okay. And we keep on going. Used to be keep on trucking, but you know. So welcome everyone. Thanks for coming. Good to see you all. And yeah, if you arrived a little late, maybe just put in your geolocation just so we have it, where you're zooming in from today. And
good to be together. And yes, we are recording because there's a bunch of folks in the community who really wanted to be here and couldn't. But we thought we would just record the first part of the more presentation-y part, and then we'll turn off the recording when we're in a more conversational mode. Volume is very low. Okay, let's see if we can fix that.
might be your volume.
Thanks for letting us know. Anyone
Could be
else
your
volume?
Could be your volume, Gila. No offense. But
so we'll have, and we know some people have to peel off early. We may not need to go to 8:30. We just wanted to be spacious. We might wrap it up real quick. I don't know. We'll see. But we gave ourselves that time if we need it. So shall we start with a little sit?
yeah, let's just sit for a bit.
5 minutes.
So like the 7 a.m. sit, no guidance, just bells. And, or bell. So we thought I'd just give you a little lay of the evening. The two of us just want to give a couple of short reflections on where we are. And then Heidi's going to have a little presentation on the survey itself, which will lead to some discussion with all of you. Then we're going to have a kind of mixer, because that was one of the things that actually came out of the survey. So we have a mixer question or two, and we'll just see how that goes.
We'll see who's still standing. We
Right,
must run
right,
away
right.
before we do that, if we do it.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's at least the plan.
So,
Yeah.
yeah. So go ahead.
You wanted me to start. Okay. John, you look very holy with the sunlight, the evening sunlight illuminating you.
Not much I can do about that. After 2 minutes.
So yeah, hello again. Welcome everyone. And also welcome to the people in the future who are listening to this recorded. If you came in late, just a reminder, we are recording this so folks can have a chance to listen to it later. But we'll turn off the recording when we enter into the more discussion portion of the session. We were discussing what song to play as you were all arriving, and if you arrived late, maybe you didn't hear, we were playing the Keep Going On song by the Bengsons. Many of you might remember that song. It was quite the song at the heart of the lockdown, the first lockdown in the spring. And it was quite a poignant song. I remember listening to it, getting quite tearful, but also it was one of those songs that it made me able to feel both incredible sadness and incredible joy at the same time. And to sort of just be okay with the complete confusion and unknown of it all. And there was something very delightful about seeing these two people who I'd never heard of before, a couple at home stuck with their kids, staying with the in-laws, and just what did they do? They had what they had, their instruments, a computer, and they just started sharing their music, and it was very meaningful for a lot of people. And there's obviously some resonance in that story with our own story. And I have found that it is good to recollect. It is good to recollect. Also to maybe get in touch with a fair amount of unprocessed grief related to the pandemic, which I know I carry and many others carry. The one reflection I wanted to offer tonight, speaking more, quite personally, is that as we open with that song, and this is often how we've told the story of Space to Meditate, right? Once upon a time, there actually really was a space. It was a physical space, a studio in Chelsea, in New York City, which we had, dreamed of for years, and painstakingly finally took a big leap, signed a lease, took a huge financial risk, spent way too much time and money decorating and making welcoming. It was going to be also the physical home of my Dharma community, which has been without a physical home for over 15 years in New York City. So it was a very momentous emotional and financial investment. And John also had projects of his own for this space. And then, of course, a year later, it was all gone. And yet something else flourished from that, which we never could have imagined, just coming from being, again, stuck at home. What can we do? How can we be of service? Never imagining that we would still be here some 3 years later, 3.5, trucking on, meditating on. So there's something really beautiful and significant about that story. But the reflection I want to bring to you tonight is that in some ways I'd like to move on from that story. I mean, to be with that story, of course, always, it doesn't go away. But I think in some ways that story has kept me in the mind state of, oh, this is an accidental thing that we never planned, that just sort of happened, and now we are stewards of it. And I don't know if I'm able to articulate this very well, but there's something about I sort of coming out of surgery and recovering from that, and then reading the survey, it just really hit me that, oh no, this is a Sangha. This is a real Sangha. And we have pastoral responsibility And if I just really fully accept, and this might sound really strange for some of you to hear, but I think I've only recently fully accepted that this is a Sangha and that I am part of this Sangha. And I bear a certain responsibility towards it, but I'm also just one of, it is its own, it has its own trajectory, its own organic trajectory that is not all about John and I. So that's kind of where I am with this, is being with the origin story, but also being with the lived reality right here and now, which also means that, if you weren't part of that origin story, you are welcome, you belong, you can be part of Space to Meditate. Yeah. Some of us might be a little trauma bonded, but not all. Okay, that's enough rambles from my reflections.
Yeah, I'm sort of looking at who's here, and the majority of you actually are part of that original group that showed up on Monday, March 16th, whenever the date was. And I was kind of thinking about looking at some of you. I know I personally, like within 2 weeks. Yeah, within 2 weeks of the start of this Sangha, and having nothing to do with COVID, lost. My mother died and my sister died within, and I know a number of you lost family, either while this Sangha was going or it prompted you to join in some cases. And, that's part of community. It's like being with people as major transitions are happening. Some of you have had grandchildren born. And, that's a transition. Some of you, including the person sitting next to me, got 2 graduate degrees and, entered a PhD program. Those are transitions. And I know, many of you have had similar kinds of transitions. And that's what kind of makes a community. And, so in a sense, and I kind of mentioned this indirectly this morning when I was talking about, or not this morning, yesterday morning, when I was talking about this birthday song that this person sang at the end of our retreat last week. And it's like every day is a birthday for all of us. Something is being reborn at every moment. And so we're always in transition. And yet, it might be nice to have some there's benefit in looking forward, so we can kind of direct where that transition is going in terms of this community. And I think that's one of the reasons why we wanted to have this kind of gathering. And that's also why we put out the survey. So we're glad that you're all here. Yeah.
Thank you, John. That was really helpful for me to hear, because you articulated more clearly what I was feeling in my heart, but struggling to express, is that when we're telling the story of the community, which we will continue to tell, how could we not? It's a powerful origin story, and it has marked many of us. We're looking back. Because there wasn't a foundational intentionality to actually build a Sangha, I think I haven't given myself permission to really lean into Sangha building in the way that is understood in my Buddhist community. Because this just happened. So now I'm ready to pivot. I just have no idea what we're going to pivot into. So that was also part of the impetus of doing a survey.
Yeah. While you're getting set up,
you're going to try to pull down the shade. Okay. So this is the not so fancy PowerPoint phase of the evening. Bear with us. I just find it helpful sometimes when looking at numbers, to actually visualize things. But if your camera's off and you're folding the laundry or driving or preparing dinner, don't worry, there won't be anything that you'll miss, because I will say what's I think important, or at least what we're drawing from some of the insights from the survey, and read things, or if your screen is really small, not to worry. Okay, so let's see if I can get this set up. Give us a moment on the tech Zoom DJ. And and just as a reminder, really happy to have be interrupted benevolently with questions as we go. just bear in mind that will be recorded. And if you're okay with that, that's great. But if not, you may want to keep your questions for afterwards.
You can chat the question or just.
Right. Yeah. You can
Yeah.
also put questions in the chat, particularly if you want to remember them, because we'll cover quite a bit. And John, is there a way that you can make the chat visible to me as we go, or is that, oh, do we lose? Okay, it's like that. All right, we'll see. Yeah, that will be helpful. Yeah, so feel free to, we'll try to keep an eye on the chat. Okay, so in case you hadn't wondered, this is the Space to Meditate Survey 2023. First of all, thank you so much for taking the time to respond. It was a pretty long survey as far as surveys go. And also thank you to the practice leaders and yeah, we asked the other teachers and practice leaders, what should we ask? You know, so I just want to also express gratitude to those that contributed also to even helping us try to formulate productive questions. So some highlights. Who responded? Well, we don't really know who responded because it was anonymous, but some people did choose to leave their names at the end. That was optional. But just to give you a sense of size, it was a pretty good response rate as far as surveys go. We have currently, as of a couple of days ago, 253 registered members and 81 people responded. And in terms of, I've simplified here a little bit, but of those so everything that we'll look at is really based on those 81 people. We're going to assume that's quite representative, but it's not truly everyone. So just bearing that in mind as we maybe draw conclusions or insights from the data. More than half of the folks who responded joined at some point in 2020, right? That's what you see in green. But there's also folks who joined us much more recently, in the last year or the last 2 years, and then that little sliver in blue, the 7.4%, those are the folks who just joined us for the 30-day meditation challenge. In some case, that was also a rejoin, but that's just to give you a sense of who responded. Now, this might seem a lot of data on the screen. This is looking at the 8 o'clock sit. We were just curious, like, how often do you come, right? So of the people who responded, I just want to say blessings to the 9 people who say they hardly ever come, but they still took the time to respond to the survey. I don't know who you are, but I just find that very generous. Maybe you're here, I don't know. But so in other words, although many people who responded, as you can see, there's a big 35%, 29 people come a few times a week. And another 20 people come very often. The people who responded weren't just people who come a lot. It was pretty wide ranging. And if you add the 7 a.m. sit, that was another good chunk of people who come very, very often or relatively often. Okay, that's the hardest chart to look at on the screen. From now on, it gets easier, I promise. All right, so we were obviously really curious, and I know this doesn't apply to everyone who's here tonight or maybe listening in the future, but we were really curious to hear about what people thought about the 7 a.m. sit. One of the reasons the survey was sparked was because we had to kind of make a bit of a decision on the fly. We didn't anticipate the popularity of the 7 a.m. sits. It was just sort of, it happened with like on a gut instinct, and then 20 people showed up and kept on showing up, and the next day and the next day and the next day. So we wanted to hear from you all before making a decision as to whether or not we continue. And the feedback was pretty clear and overwhelmingly yes. So 30%, 24 people who responded to the survey said they would come very often if we continued, and another 12 people said they would come from time to time. So that was to give you a sense of like the kind of critical mass that we need to sort of be able to make decisions. Like that was very clear. It's less clear with other things. That's maybe what I'm sort of preempting a little bit with other ideas. There was also feedback that people liked the challenge, right? There's a different feeling when it's ongoing than a challenge. So I'll jump ahead to something we're planning to say a bit more about at the end. Our thought is to just find our feet with getting the 7 a.m. System going, getting that sustainable, finding our rhythm with it. making sure it can actually function. And then a couple of times a year, we'll do a challenge where it'll just be John and I ringing bells, and maybe we'll introduce, we'll have a theme. So we might read some verses of the Dhammapada, every morning. Some people said they missed the poetry at 7 a.m. Others say they really like the silence, but we could imagine maybe having a 30-day something where there's just something very short read at the beginning that's dharmically oriented. Okay, so that's 7 a.m. So here we are, glorious, at the end of the 30-day challenge. It's quite funny sharing a picture on Zoom of a bunch of people pictured on Zoom. Some of you are there. But yeah, we took a little snapshot for posterity. Of course, this is not everybody who participated. People did kind of come and go, but it was quite a lovely feeling. And several people reported they really felt a deepening of their practice and great momentum from that experience. So we were just really glad to hear that. Okay, other ideas about the schedule. So there were lots of ideas. Not everything you see here on the slides speaks to everything, but I'm just sort of wanted to pinpoint some of the, the ones that jumped out more than others. So there were several monthly suggestions we had of like, what if we had a monthly Dharma talk, something that we kind of used to do. A monthly poetry night, that too is something that we used to do. Something new that we suggested, oh, how about monthly Sangha member life stories, from a, like, what are your spiritual turning points? This is a kind of framework in which we can do this. It's quite inspiring. And we had a lot of like, yes, I would come probably from time to time, a sizable number over, between 20 and 28 people said yes to that kind of thing. But only 4 or 6, quite a small number would be like, yes, really down for that. I would definitely make that. But still, there's like enough data there to give that serious consideration. Other ideas were less popular. Also, we were a bit intrigued that there was some energy around the idea of having an evening sit, silent sit, as well as a lunchtime sit. So we're kind of leaving those ideas a bit on the back burner, but it was just an interesting data point. They jumped out versus other ideas that we.
Some of you may remember that we actually did, when we started,
Right.
We had 2 sits a day. We were crazy. I mean,
Well, we were just very motivated.
Yeah.
But yeah, those were
at
different times.
8 a.m. and
Yeah.
6 p.m.
So, and we haven't, just if I can, on that point, quite frankly, I don't know if I'm speaking only personally here. I don't think we really, since we've begun, as much as mornings have been robust and consistent and have a life of their own. I don't quite think we've figured out evenings or afternoons. We've tried different formats. We could go into it more during the discussion time. We could tell you how that went. Some of you were part of that, but we just haven't quite found something that was clearly sustainable. So we have a question in the chat. Were the monthly option responders from time to time the same 20? Well, we don't know if it was the same people. Thanks for the question. Because it was an anonymous survey, we can't track that. It's possible that there's overlap for sure, but it's also possible that there's a different crowd. We know that when we have programming in the evenings, we actually have, there's some people who are also morning people, but we have actually a different population that shows up. And also it's a little bit more accessible to people on the West Coast, right? Or in different, going more west, not necessarily all the way to the West Coast, but it makes it a little bit more accessible. Let me pause there actually just to see if there's any other questions. Catching my breath. Okay. All right, still on the kind of scheduling, programming part of the survey, we also asked quite a few questions about retreats and tried to gauge what was the appetite for quarterly online practice days, quarterly in-person practice days, weekend residential retreat somewhere in the New York area, or a week-long residential retreat. And they're, positive, quite sizable appetite for that in all cases. With, I must say, of all of them, very emphatic, including long qualitative comments about the desire to really practice in person in New York for those who are able. Sometimes that was very clearly practice days, a request for more practice days or more consistent practice days, but sometimes also just in connection to another theme which arose, which was just actually the opportunity to connect, as Sangha members, right? To be able to reach out beyond our Zoom boxes to the left, to the right, up, down, in addition to being able to practice in person. Okay. Yeah, just to be clear, when we see things like very likely to attend, it makes it a little bit easier for us to commit and sort of put in the organizational legwork and sometimes make the financial commitment to the spaces that we would rent. But let's not forget also the value of online practice days, particularly as not all of us are in the New York area, including me soon. Okay, so we had a couple of questions. This is in a different register around belonging. We wanted to know how important it is, first of all, for people to feel a sense of belonging and connection, without making the assumption that this is a real deal breaker or very important for everyone. But still, as you can see, so the column 4 and 5 are the biggest. So, clearly, gosh, if I did the math, yeah, that's 2/3 of the community, or members, at least, that responded, feel that actually having a sense of belonging and connection is really important. And for some people, that's not as crucial. Maybe they're here more for the teachings or just for the opportunity to really be consistent with their meditation practice. And maybe they're a little bit less interested in community connection, and that's okay. It's all good, but it's helpful to kind of know. And obviously then that leads to the next question, which is like, well, okay, it's important for a lot of people, but not everyone. And how are we doing on that front? Like, do people actually feel a sense of belonging? Right. So 2 different questions. How important is it? And then, okay, do you actually feel a sense of belonging and connection? And, mostly yes, if you look at the graph, but it doesn't quite match. Of course, we don't know if it's the same people, right? We don't know if the people for whom it's really important actually feel a strong sense of belonging, but what we can see in the numbers is that it's higher in the it's more important, and a bit lower in the it's actually felt, right? So that what we take from that is, okay, we're doing okay, but there's like opportunity here. This is something we can work on, and really think about how we can deepen that for those who want to, without also imposing that too much on people who really, who have different types of needs, and that's okay. Yeah, let me just pause here and see if I hope that was clear, but feel free to I'll interrupt myself. Let's make that deal if I see a question on the chat. Otherwise, I'm just going to keep going, because it is the keep going on Sangha. Okay, this was an interesting question. We had a bit of a learn. This is like the do's and don'ts of surveys, right? We asked a question about, would you be interested in being part of a smaller facilitated Kalyana Mitra, which means beautiful spiritual friendship, in the Buddhist tradition group. And we had a resounding 45%, almost 46%, who said, I don't know what this means. So, I'm giggling, not at the Sangha, but at us, at our naiveness of asking a question that was maybe had too many assumptions that there might be mutual understanding around what that might be. But it's basically, and for those of you who are frustrated by that question, we apologize. But it's quite common in a number of Buddhist Sanghas, one way to sort of deepen practice, integrate practice, but also develop spiritual friendship, which is understood certainly in a Buddhist framework is really important as a practice, forming smaller peer groups that either meditate together, study together, check in together. And so we were just curious about what the appetite for that might be. And clearly some people very much said yes, and maybe have some experience of that. So maybe they felt more able to to say yes to that. But yeah, we could have maybe made that a bit more clear. On that note around, meeting in smaller groups, perhaps around, Kalyanamitrika groups are just for the sake of friendship, right? So there's sort of no particular intentionality other than sharing our lives, our practice, supporting one another. But we also had a question about affinity groups, right? This has sometimes come up in our short history. So we had a group of men who were meeting at some point on a Wednesday night, and that's kind of petered out a little bit. And there was some early on in the pandemic. Also, I think I led 1 or 2 sessions on white awareness, if I recall. So it's occasionally the question of affinity groups has come up also in some of your qualitative feedback. I'm not going to show you all the data, is quite extensive, but just sort of the themes that came out that were the most popular, if you will, bearing in mind there were some people who responded like, nope, not interested. That's okay. And that's fine. But there was interest around some of the themes that you see on the screen. And for those who can't see the screen, just naming them. What was interesting, which was also indicative of another surprise we had a bit later on in the survey, which I'll share a bit more about. The most popular area of all was things to do with poetry and creativity. That came out, as a very, sort of clustering poetry and mindfulness and creative writing together. So that was really interesting. Maybe it's not a surprise to you because you're like, well, yeah, duh. Well, I was kind of surprised. Like I didn't necessarily expect that. A second area was more around, and just coupled them, engaged Dharma, climate justice. What does it mean to bring practice into the world? This type of area. There was a sizable group of 13 people were interested in exploring mindfulness and work. And this came up in another theme of almost equal importance, and it came up in different ways. So I'm kind of putting a bunch of different things together, but the whole area of aging, illness, loss also came up as a request in some of the qualitative comments. Like this is an area I'm struggling with. I would really appreciate more support here, since we asked you open questions about what would be supportive to your practice. And on racial affinity groups, white awareness, 7 people, and a BIPOC group, 4 people were interested in that. And that might seem like a really small number, but we don't have a lot of people of color in our Sangha. So we have to also maybe consider that of this relatively small number of people of color we have in our Sangha, that actually could be a high percentage of that subset of the population. So something for us to think about. So those are affinity groups. And again, we're just sharing data. We're not like telling you, da-da, drum roll, that's what we decided to do. Okay? We're just kind of being in the data with you all and wanted to reflect together. But it was helpful to see those themes. Okay, here's some more qualitative feedback that came out of this. So reoccurring themes. And again, please don't take it personally if you shared something quite specific that you're not seeing here. It doesn't mean that we didn't read your response. We read carefully every single response, but we wanted to offer a sort of high-level synthesis of what are the things that kept on coming back over and over again by many people, right? Many respondents. That doesn't mean that the lone voice asking for X is not important, but obviously as we're trying to think about the future, we're first looking to, well, where is there the most energy gravitating towards in this feedback? So as I already mentioned, a big request for more in-person practice.
In-person activity.
And in-person activities, yeah, in-person practice and in-person activities, which I'll say more in a moment. And then this is one of the most surprising things that happened. You all had so much to say about poetry. Oh my goodness. Big, long paragraphs from many people. And it was interesting because initially, and I really want to thank our teaching community here, because initially, I forget how this happened, but we didn't have a question about poetry. And then it was through conversations with the practice leaders that we said, oh yeah, we should ask a question about poetry. And it was just an open question. I think the question was something like, what role does poetry play in your practice, or how important is this? And it was just really interesting how this question brought up so much energy. And actually, it would be a great mixer question, maybe, right? Like what what role does poetry have in your life, or what's a poem that's really had an impact on you? Bearing in mind, some people were like, I could leave it, or mostly indifferent, but once in a while there's a good one. Also lots of suggestions around, I would say constructive feedback about, delivery, how people might deliver poems. So thank you. And the length of poems and the types of poems, whether they're explicitly connected to Dharma practice or not, or, anyway, so y'all have a lot to say about poetry. And I, for one, and maybe this is my own temperament and denial, I don't speak for both of us here. Frankly, I had underestimated until I read this survey, how, I guess just overall the importance of the poetry in our community culture, actually, and how that is something quite distinctive and special, and possibly really helping folks to stay engaged and practice in ways that I hadn't necessarily, it's not like just decorative, right? It's not just a little enhancement. For some people, it's really, really important. So I'm taking some time to reflect on that more deeply myself. There were a number of people also, another reoccurring theme, not quite as verbose as what y'all had to say about poetry, but a lot of requests to go deeper in the Dharma. And this took very different shapes and forms. Sometimes it was a request for more study or reading suttas together, even requests to learn more about mantra. So sometimes it's not necessarily study or intellectual engagement, but also devotional engagement. And so that was interesting because we both, well, especially John, offer a lot of other things in the world where people can learn more about the Dharma with us. And yet that request was coming here to Space to Meditate. And then the last one was another big theme that came up in really thoughtful ways. And I just really want to rejoice in the thoughtfulness of so many people, not just saying, oh, it would really be great if we could have more of this, or I yearn for this, but actually really bringing some creative ideas around how to do that, and acknowledging also the delicacy of kind of switching modes and what it might feel like, how we might skillfully allow for more peer-to-peer connection, which, if we weren't a physical center, we wouldn't have to think through as much, right? Because you'd all be, for those who want to, you'd all be hanging out at the end of the session in the hallway on the sidewalk. You would continue your conversations, you'd exchange numbers and emails, and just things would happen quite organically. And on Zoom, it's a bit different. We have to sort of create the hallway, right? Or the hallway sounds,
The elevator.
not the elevator, or the hangout space, right? That's not the meditation hall. These are just some quotes that speak to the way this desire for peer-to-peer connection was expressed, and also, again, speaking to the thoughtfulness. So I'll read some of them. One person said, I think small facilitated spiritual friendship group sounds like something I could love. So that's like a Kalyana Mitra group. Also, could you facilitate more independent connecting among members? Maybe a community directory, right? In other words, not having to always go through us, right? And to be transparent about that, sometimes we get an occasional email from someone like, oh, I really would like to speak with so-and-so. Can you share their email? And then we have to write to that so-and-so and say, hey, someone's asking for your email. Are you okay for it to be shared? And like, what happened? How can we find ways to basically take us out of the equation? You're all adults, right? So presumably we can find ways to do this thoughtfully and ethically. Here's another quote. I'd be curious to know more about the other people. I think many of us feel shy. It might be nice if, rather than say an affinity group, there was a get to know people session. Like, oh my gosh. I was really struck by that, because sometimes I tend to overcomplicate things, and I'm imagining affinity groups like in a physical Dharma center. And actually what a lot of people who maybe been practicing together on Zoom for some time are asking for is just, like, I see this person every morning. I just would like to know a bit more about them, right? Sort of coming back to something quite humanly beautiful and simple. which is just to get to know each other. And on that note, someone suggested, so this is another quote, perhaps a mixer once a month where random changing groups of 2 or 3 would meet up in breakout rooms and exchange on a preset question. And this person had really quite lovely suggestions around what those like meaning, not just chit chat, if you will, but questions that would really ignite connection and help us also in our practice. Another quote was, I feel like asking if anyone has anything they want to share is broad and people are more likely to stay quiet. Maybe asking for stories. Someone suggests ask people to tell a story about their cat, or, as an example. So that was helpful feedback for us. So like the sort of assumption at the end of meditation in that little moment where we just hold space for the community and see if there's anyone who would like to say anything. That could be a really awkward space, right? Particularly, and there was some feedback around, well, I only come time to time, or I'm new and, I don't quite know how to bring myself in when that question is offered. It's too broad, right? Too broad and maybe a bit intimidating. And this is a slightly different comment, the last one I'll read, which is more about practicing in person, but it's also in this realm of connection and peer-to-peer connection. Though I know it's challenging, this is the quote, I would greatly appreciate more in-person opportunities to be with this Sangha. This could include outdoor walking meditations or potluck meals where we can just spend some time. Oh yeah, of course. Yeah. So that just gives you a taste. Those are just selections. There were many more comments in this realm. So I'm getting towards the end, friends, if you're hanging in there. Other feedback. I've tried to synthesize a lot of words because you all gave a lot of feedback. It was quite very rich survey. We're still really integrating it. And just to say, and we weren't necessarily asking for this, but spontaneously people expressed a lot of gratitude, and sometimes in very personal ways and very moving ways that really affirmed the significance of this community for people in their lives. And it was just very, very moving. Sometimes we don't. This is also where maybe I don't know you enough to know what impact this community, this community's had in your lives. And I would like to know more about that. And the survey was giving us a little bit of insight into that. So thank you. It does help. It's not just about sort of cheering us on or telling us we're doing a good job. It's not really about us. It's about what's happening between us. It was just helpful to know, like, oh, wow, okay, this is making a difference. And also thank you for feedback. Teachers got feedback, practice leaders got feedback in both directions. So that's really helpful. And it's important that we have a culture in the community where it's where teachers are approachable and can receive feedback and know their impact more precisely and be able to grow and learn and adjust and repair if ever any repair is needed for something. So thank you for that. And we're also thinking about how to make that a bit more easy than the occasional once a year survey, right? We should have mechanisms for that. So that's something we're thinking about. There was also a lot of appreciation. We know it's a subset of the community that tends to come, but there were some really moving words about the impact of the sharing circle, which happens on Friday. And again, the origin story there is Mark brought that practice to this community. So another, reminder that it's not all up to us, right? There's incredible vitality, creativity, and depth of experience and practice here. And the feedback was so moving about the sharing circle that it also made us wonder, like, oh, this is something that really seems to work. And we've developed a culture about it. Should we just do more of this, maybe at different time slots and see what happens without having to, come up with something new? How about just developing a bit more what we're already doing and that we know is working? We also had some feedback about sound issues and bells, either not enough bells or not hearing bells or anyway. So thank you. We're going to pun intended, tune our instruments in the teaching team and sort out our bell situations. But also, request for a bell both at the beginning and at the end, and also resolving some sound issues. There were these are just like kind of random things, but they did come up, questions around whether or not Space to Meditate would move into a 501c3 status to enable more charitable giving or as an incentive. And also, and we can't do it justice here, but there were so many other topics that came up. From maybe one person or maybe two people at most, suggestions around programming, more programming around trauma. There are clearly, one or two people who really love movement. I wish there were more. It'd be more straightforward for us to really lean into programming around that. But that was their request for mantras, a request for, specificities around timing. As much as we've explored an earlier morning meditation, we also have a small cluster of people asking for a later than 8 o'clock meditation, a 9 a.m. meditation, East Coast time. So again, this slide doesn't do justice to all the feedback that we got, but it's just to give you a sense of some of the themes that came up. All right, I'm gonna catch my breath because now it's the now what?
Don't worry, it's only 2 more slides. Yeah.
But let me pause there before we go into the now what, actually, because we don't really know now what. I mean, there's some things that we know, but some things we're still reflecting on and cooking and giving ourselves time actually to not sort of have sort of knee-jerk quick responses to this. But yeah, let's just pause here, and bearing in mind it's being recorded, but just seeing if there's any questions or thoughts on this. First, reflecting back at Luna. Yes, you've got your hand up.
Hi there.
Hi.
Hi, Eddie and John. Thanks so much. And I wanted to acknowledge and express my appreciation for the enormous time commitment and generosity that you've given to keeping this Sangha available in such a sacred space for so many of us. So I had a question for you both, which is, given the changes, the significant changes that are coming up in your lives, how does that impact your availability time-wise, if it does? I mean, I imagine it will. And do you have 1 or 2 priorities for yourselves as far as what this Sangha is or means for yourselves?
Do you have, was the word I just want to make sure I heard the word correctly. Did you say priorities?
Priorities or intentions, and I'm not sure, because there's a lot of different ideas and there's a lot of different possibilities. So I guess I wanted to kind of turn the lens back to you to see if in envisioning what this creation that you've put out into the world, if there's, for you as the creators and the teachers and the leaders, if there's something that stands out to you as the core or core elements of what this is in your vision.
Yeah, thank you.
You want to respond to that first?
Yeah, I mean, I can. I mean, the changes are more on this side. I mean, in terms of life, major life changes in terms of Paide's upcoming schedule. On the other hand, it's more about time zones at this point, because of course she's been in school anyway, in various forms. And so this is an important, I would say that this Sangha is, in terms of both, I'll speak for both of us, I know it's very important to us. Partly at this point, well, it's important to us because we love teaching and we love making this offer. I know that, and if it were just that, it'd be easy in a sense, right? We would just turn on the computer and that would be that. What's so interesting is that as we went along, or like a year and a half ago, I said, maybe we should do a weekly newsletter, right? And so we started this weekly newsletter, and I would I would write something, and then it would become something longer, and then Upadi would need to edit it, and then it would like, oh, it's the weekly newsletter again. I need to write something else. And, so that was at first, I mean, after, at some point it's a pain in the butt. At other points, it's like, oh, it's great. It's forcing me to do something that I should be doing anyway. And so it's really kind of an interesting evolution for me.
And you've become such a good writer.
And well, with the help of a few things, but and David Grogan here, who's a wonderful writer, has pushed me a bit. But there is something about that. So that becomes a pain and a joy. Let's put it that way, because it's like and so the frustration, and this is where I think which didn't actually come up. We didn't ask this question in the newsletter. I mean, in the survey about the newsletter, because one of the frustrations is that, like, we put out there, how did we put it? Take care of your inner blogger and send us something. And we got a few really, really good blogs. I mean, Janice wrote a beautiful one. Rome wrote a beautiful one. There were a few others that came around. I can't remember. And that was great, and that actually gets community involvement. And so I would say, and this is one of the reasons we did the survey, is to get more community involvement. But in terms of priority, right now it's a really high priority. Yeah.
Thank you, Luna. Thanks, John.
Thank you.
All right, I'll try to respond to your question. And I'm also just delighting and appreciating your two profound questions. Actually, you've like taken this conversation to another level already. I hope some of the two remaining slides might be partial indications, maybe not answers, but indications of an orientation. But let me answer your first question with some clarity. And I'm touched because it didn't quite occur to me that maybe people is worried too big a word. Maybe there's like some low voltage anxiety about like, is this going to go away? We did at one point ask the community, I think in 2021, should we stop now? And y'all had a revolt. It was like, oh, okay. All right, we're going to be the keep going on community. So what's been very moving, Luna, and I'll, sharing this with everyone, that in my preparing to leave New York, I've had, my heartstrings are tugging, and it's been quite a painful, sad separation from two of my sanghas. So my local Buddhist community, the Triratna Buddhist community, and also my Buddhist community, which is more multi-lineage at Union Theological, which have really been two sanghas where I'm deeply rooted and deeply invested, and have held significant responsibilities there. And I have felt, I'm a Buddhist with attachments. I have felt the pull of attachment as I depart. And what's quite magical is I get to take you with me. And I hadn't quite computed that. And so all this heartbreak that I'm having with these two other sanghas, I'm not having a space to meditate. What I'm having is actually what I'm having for me personally is like, wow, this community is really important to me personally, and I'm going to be out on my own. There's no one from my Buddhist community in the Chicago area, except there's one person, but who I don't even know, and who's newer to the community and not, or there's no like community as an individual. I'll be really out on my own. I have no friends, no family yet. So all of a sudden, space to meditate is incredibly, you were always all incredibly important, but important in new ways, and you're portable. How amazing is that? I just have to become an early morning person, which is going to be a physiological, metabolic, neurological challenge. I don't know, we'll see. Yeah, so no change in terms of just getting up earlier. So I'm gonna have to, some life changes there. And how blessed am I to be able to undergo this big life change and yet take you all with me. Like, that's just magical. And maybe the second part of your question, Luna, which I'm not entirely sure I totally understand, but what I will say, and again, the next slides might illuminate this, is both coming out of surgery, because going through the intense surgeries that we went through, and I know speaking for myself, it's natural that one orients a bit more inwardly, right? It's like the body's undergoing this major intervention and then has to heal, and very, basic things like, how do I get my socks on, like literally by myself, right? So now that I'm over that hump and regaining full health, and thank you again, so many of you were able to help with our fundraiser, which also was part of what we're recovering from, is the financial impact of all that. I feel more ready to sort of be more outwardly oriented and really step into this realization that although it was not intended, right, it was not a planned birth, right? Although, wow, this is a sangha, and that in my Buddhist tradition, that is very significant. It also means that I have a certain kind of responsibility with others, not alone, but a responsibility too. And that I need to take that very seriously. It's just an unusual situation because in my Buddhist order, which is different from John's, this whole thing of it being non-denominational, multi-lineage, it's not quite part of the paradigm. So it's, whereas if I were in my Buddhist context, there's like a 35-page guidebook on, okay, you want to form a sangha, here's the rules, here's how it's supposed to work, right? Whereas here, it's much more like that song that we opened with.
It's organic.
We're making it up together as we go along, and I'm learning to be me and who I am, but in a context that is not exactly my Buddhist community, my order, the one I'm ordained into, and that's okay. So, but I'm curious about that. Now it feels like an adventure and not so much a happy accident. But yeah, thank you for your beautiful questions. They were helpful, actually. Yeah, really helpful. So let me wrap up this PowerPoint so we can get rid of the PowerPoint and just be with each other, if that's okay. But keep those questions coming. So now what? So a few things we're drawing from this survey. One is, and this is maybe already quite straightforward and obvious, looking on the left-hand side of the slide, in the immediate future was like, okay, the 7 a.m. sit is something we need to continue. There's very obvious momentum. And by the way, it's okay if you're not one of those people at 7 a.m. We love everybody, it's all good, but clearly there's a sizable cluster of people who find benefit and for whom it works better. What we hadn't quite computed, is also, a lot of people went back to work at some point coming out of the pandemic. And that means that for some folks, 8 a.m. is a bit late and 7 a.m. is really helpful as an option, even though it makes it harder for people on the West Coast. So that's going to continue. And for me, it will be a whopping 6 a.m. But we know that one of the keys to sustainability and consistency is it being a team thing, right? So that's kind of what we're working on right now. And apologies for the mishap this morning, but we're finding our routine and our way of working as a sort of distinct team of facilitators that undertake, and it may seem like a small thing, but actually it's not, like making sure that you're there and opening the Zoom room and ringing bells and creating a sense of continuity and container, also so that people who sit there regularly don't necessarily feel like it's a rotating cast, of people coming in and out that they don't have a connection to. There's a lot of connection in silence, as we know. So we're just working on finding like what's the right model, and sustainability is also not just consistency, but even like financially, right? Should people be compensated? Is it volunteers? What does that look like? We're also noticing that it's bringing in new members to the community, some who become regular contributors financially in terms of dana, and that makes it a bit easier. So that helps. So that's a yes. Now we're just working on the how, if I summarize that. And as I mentioned earlier, something continuous is different than a challenge. And some people really like the notion of a challenge. So as much as we'll have a team at 7 a.m., we'll also think about how we do a 30-day challenge. And by the way, maybe not just with the 7 a.m. sit, right? That could also be to the 8 a.m. folks. Like we all deserve once in a while a little booster challenge. Why not if we're up for that? So we'll try to keep that concept and play with it a bit. So that's the immediate. On the right-hand side, you see we call this nearish future. In the beginning, just to pull back the curtain, I certainly, my project manager self came out, and, oh my gosh, 20 years of working in corporate, like I know how to do project management and strategic planning, and we were going to have a clear calendar. And then a good, wise friend said, hey, folks, slow down. You don't need to solve every matter or respond to every request. Take your time. You're going through big life transitions. Just try to do one or two things well at a time, and it's okay. I think part of me felt like when we put a survey out into the world and you all share from your hearts and your requests and your needs, I sort of feel a moral obligation to meet them, but it's not realistic that we can meet everything all at once. So that's why we're not committing to a date. It's nearish future. But drawing from some things that came from the survey, as it may not be a surprise, we're going to try out this online mixer session thing. And we had some folks that volunteered themselves to share their skills with this for those who wish. I know, this is not everybody's cup of tea, and there's introverts out there who might cringe and run away, and that's okay. It's just something additional for those who wish, and we'll work on how to make that work. The other thing that we'll do in the nearest future is a Sangha directory on an opt-in basis. This is a bit technical, but basically we're quite fortunate that the software that we use, I'll try to say this in simple terms and not get too nerdy here. The software that we use for people to become members at whatever access level, open access or financially contributing, that software can actually do much more. And we can have a protected, so, only if you're a member, you can see it. Just like when you go onto the Space to Meditate website, you have access to a member area, and there's certain resources there that the general public cannot see. We could have in that area a directory where, and again, opt-in, you a little bit like, for those of you who are familiar with LinkedIn, you could have your own profile and you could say as much or as little as you want, right? You can share your contact details if you want or not. You could, share your favorite poem, or, we'll figure out, we can customize the way the directory works. I know this because I manage 3 other directories on 3 other websites. So it's not that complicated. It's just time. It's web development time. I need a good week to build it out, which I will somehow find. But the good news is we have so the great news is we have the tech. I just need to find the time to do it, to build it out, and then you'll be invited to log in and decide if you want to opt in, which just means making yourself a bit more visible and available so that we can facilitate peer-to-peer connection. And with, as you'll see in purple, this brings up, of course, we could create a directory, but we want to be also a bit thoughtful around the awkwardness that might arise, because this hasn't been part of our culture up till now. And we know when we transitioned from practicing only on Zoom and we had a couple of practice days, there was also some awkwardness, and we're human. We're going to sometimes, maybe not be totally sensitive to one another, or we might have a bunch of ideas about this person we see on a box on our screen every day for weeks. And then we enter into contact with them, and it's quite different from what we imagined. And that could result in hurt or just awkwardness. So we want to think about some ethical guidelines, suggestions, around how, and we hope to harvest that from all of us together about, what are our communication guidelines for how we might reach out to one another, or things we want to bear in mind, so that we can, practice is not just meditation, right? It's also in how the space we create between us, the culture we create between us. So how can we do this with care? Yeah, so we'll work on that. And then obviously nearish future, we're going to continue to develop opportunities for retreat, clearly, which is bumped up on the priority list, opportunities for practice in person in New York. And I know it's not here, but I mentioned it earlier. I should have put that as a third bullet point. This question around the magic of the sharing circle on Friday mornings, because that's something that's working well. Is it something we could do more of, and at different time slots for people, and how would that work? And because it's not teaching, right? Or guiding meditation, also, how can we enlist a little bit more of the momentum of the community and the shared experience of the community to expand that? Okay, one more slide, folks, and then we're really done with the slides, at least. Other things that we're thinking about, but these are not fully formed ideas or commitments, whereas the other ones are quite straightforward, like, oh yeah, we could have a directory for people who want that. That's kind of low-hanging fruit. Other things we're thinking about is more just programming, right? This question, things that came up around the questions to do with affinity groups or requests for courses or more Dharma study. How do we lean into that? There was some, there were several requests for more Dharma talks, Monday mornings, the 10 or 15 minute Dharma talk at the end of meditation is appreciated, but clearly not enough for a good number of you. So we may bring evening Dharma talks back, along with trying out maybe Sangha member Dharma life stories, which would be a great way to, I guess the word that comes up, it feels very technical and kind of, I don't know, it's not charming in the way that, or magical in the way I would like it to be. But when Luna, you were asking what are the priorities, what I'm calling this provisionally is there's something about how do we lateralize the Sangha more, as opposed to it gravitating so much around, us here and you guys there. And how do we already built out a teaching team, that's great, but then how do we build more connective tissue among us, and so people can feel more held, supported, but also more visible, more known. And then this whole area of, oh my gosh, the poetry, mindful creativity, mindful writing, gosh, what do we do with that? Yeah, so there's other themes there to explore: mindfulness at work, aging, loss, and so forth. And the other area, and I've alluded to this several times, which is not so much programming. I think we were a little bit caught up sometimes a bit too much in the sort of, John sort of talked about this when he was talking about the newsletter. We can get a bit trapped, I think, sometimes in the which is not healthy for our practice, around sort of becoming content delivery machines. Oh, we need to do a course on this and a course on that, and people want this. Okay, it's like good, and you want a side order of fries and with ketchup, and that's not really very healthy. Not that there isn't a need for thoughtfulness around programming, but there's a whole other area which is just as important, if not more important, which is more about how we do things, right? And not what are we doing. So one question around that is, how do we create, more opportunities for engagement for those who wish, to volunteer, to really, part of belonging and being a part of is that, right? It's the joy I know for myself of being able to stack the chairs, at the end of the sit and clear the room. It's like a simple way to sort of, participate. How do we create that kind of sense of belonging and this sense of we're co-creating this together in an online environment, right? And we've already enlisted some volunteers to help us with silent sits in the morning, for example, but that could also be like, some of you are experts on social mixers. Awesome. I'm not. I'm a total introvert. That's scary stuff for me. So we have skills here, people who are capable. How do we invite that in more clearly? And then also this whole area of, wow, okay, this really is a Sangha, right? That means we need, and there it's so implicit, but actually it's probably, we're at a time of maturation now where it's probably even overdue that we have clear ethical guidelines, for people in teaching capacities. So if you have a concern or even a grievance and a complaint that you would like to make, that there be a clear pathway for that, and possibly a council or committee or team that is responsible for receiving that. That we're a little bit more clear about the communities that we're accountable to and who our teachers are. So that's a whole area. Nothing of any that we know of any, gravity has happened. It's more that, oh, no, this is missing, and it's much better to get all this in place before you need it one day, right? You don't want to be setting up and thinking about governance and ethical guidelines and healing and restorative practices when you're in a crisis. You want to be thinking about that based on personal experience, I can tell you, when you're not in a situation of crisis. Some communities have like an ombudsman, right? Or ombudsperson. It's kind of a gendered language, but anyway, could there be someone that's not the teachers that is, sort of willing to be that person for us? Do we have a Sangha council, that maybe people who want to volunteer for a year or so to kind of be more in dialogue with the teaching team around how things are going and offering their time to brainstorm with us around programming and this type of thing. The question of becoming a 501c3 comes up. Do we find fiscal sponsorship? We've gone back and forth about this. We've started wondering about whether we should incorporate more as a church for a few different reasons. So this is something on our mind. And we're going to continue to look at that. And then also, I'll end with the last two things, but not in that order. We need to better organize the poetry now that we know loud and clear, 56 people had a lot, 50 out of the 81, 56 people wrote about the poetry. This is important. So just having this wonky Word document that's a bit difficult to navigate. And we've had some volunteers from time to time try to help us clean it up. To put some TLC into that tool, since it's so critical to our culture and way of doing things. And then lastly, and this is not so much for us here, although it may come up, but for the broader outside world, people are checking us out and maybe thinking about joining. I think John and I need to be much more explicit, actually, about our intentionality, to use Luna's word earlier, and also where our backgrounds are and how we approach being committed Dharma practitioners, but in this particular context where not everyone is Buddhist. And some of you in the feedback that, said that very loud and clear, that this is an important community to me, but I want to make it really clear that I'm not a Buddhist. And we want to continue to be a space where no one needs to be carrying a particular flag, that everyone can feel like they can belong and be part of, while at the same time being very clear that these are the lineages that inform us, and that we study and that we practice in. Okay, that's my word cloud. Whew. I'm going to stop sharing. Because, oh yes, and the last word was the word of our wise friend who told us, okay, kids, slow down. Don't need to jump into action planning. And I have to say that was just such a huge relief, because I would not want this to be a problem to solve. I would rather it be a creative adventure we have together. And it's such a relief to know that at least speaking, maybe John can figure it all out, but I can't figure it all out. So we're in it together, friends. Thank you for listening, and you're great.
Thank you for taking it off.
And again, for answering the questionnaire.
Yeah.
We got so much more than what we anticipated.
Yeah, so it'd be great, just to hear from some of you, anything that surprised you and what we put out, or any other questions or thoughts before we sort of go into our mixer.
I realized one small thing I forgot to say. It's actually quite important. We had a question around mutual aid, if you remember, and several of you were really quite intrigued by this, or didn't quite know what it meant, wanted more information. Some of you thanked us just for asking, thought it was a beautiful question. What's interesting is several of you suggested, why don't we have a directory, or at least some way of being able to contact each other for those who wish more easily. So our assumption around that is that let's start by having an opt-in directory. And it's possible that things like mutual aid, right, the community helping each other out, will naturally arise,
Yeah.
right? Organically without us having to organize it. So that might be, that's a little bit of a bet that will happen, but we'll see. Anyway. that
Yeah,
was
I
just-
think it would happen because, so often in the mornings, somebody expresses a need for support. And it's really in that request, just thoughts,
Yeah.
and well-wishing from the community, but sometimes somebody might want to do more. And I know in the past, some of you have managed, connected with each other and done that. So I think this opens that more up. So,
So we said we were going to stop recording at
Yeah.
this point. Yeah. But we will, so I'm going to just do that now. But